that there was a risk on the corporate risk register previously around leader. It was recommended to be removed from the corporate risk register, and if you remember at a previous board meeting, Ellen Donovan said, can we just leave it there until such time as the Outcomes, Quality and Performance Committee, which was meeting shortly after the board, had a little look and got some more assurance. I was satisfied, Ellen was satisfied that assurance was given, and therefore that risk has reduced. So the corporate risk register is as presented, with 5 risks that are recommended for removal from the corporate risk register. That means they're going back into directorates for executive oversight for the management of a risk, and that 3 have been increased in score, added and increased in score, and these relate to, unsurprisingly, GP collective action, the provider selection regime changes regarding contracts, and the capacity of specialised support housing for those people with learning disabilities and autism. There is also, another 4 of them that have increased, one around primary care data sharing agreement around population health management. That is the position for the board. In terms of process, I can answer questions about how those risks are harvested from the directorates and brought here. Directors, I'm sure, will want to help me with the answering of any questions that colleagues may have around what those risks are actually mean and what we're actually doing about them.
Okay, John, do you have anything you want to add from a audit risk? No.
From my perspective,
okay.
As was said, on this occasion, unfortunately, we're doing it the wrong way.
Okay.
And that audit will meet on Monday.
So that's the corporate risk register.
Yeah. So any questions from board members about the corporate risk register? And it's detailed down there in the progress against it, which is covered on the plan. Judy.
I think one of the things, looking at it, there are some risks that have been on a very long time. And I suppose we need to just challenge ourselves around mitigations I assume we're putting in place are not working, or are we just accepting the risk and basically it's going to be there, and is it a risk or is it now an issue that we just deal with? So I just think having things on from 2022, 2023 just doesn't feel dynamic.
With any particular ones, Judy? Because I think things like the financial management is bound to be ongoing, isn't it? Oh, sorry,
I'm looking at the I'm on the corporate risk. Yeah. So the primary care development delegation, the Broadmead walk-in centre, the next one, specialist housing around complex needs. You know, we're talking 18 months, 2 years.
Shane?
Just something to ask ourselves, really, I suppose.
Yeah, I suppose that's a really good point. At what point does something which isn't a risk is an issue? Because we're constantly managing it, as opposed to it being a risk that we're trying to mitigate. We can certainly take that lens back in and look at those ones that have been like. We use it to, it's a strange, I suppose we do use it to regularly say, are we managing and how are we managing it? And you've raised a real good question, which is, well, that's not risk management, that's just management. So we're actually using it to see, on every time we look at this document, what are we doing about that thing, rather than are we actually reducing the risk. It's a fair point, Chair. I'm more than happy to go back, and it's a really valid challenge, because we use it to say, what have we done this month on this thing?
Could I add to that?
Yeah, okay.
We could start to segment by long-term versus medium-term and short-term risks, and then at least we get a view on what's constant and what isn't. And I guess we need some way of identifying whether or not we're mitigating enough. So where there's room for more mitigation, we don't want to lose it from our register or from our, from our view. But if we think that, this is sort of an ongoing thing and nothing new has come up, it doesn't eat into the bandwidth that we should be focusing on things that are much more urgent.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really fair challenge.
Yeah.
Chair.
Steve?
So one of the hard things with these things is of those risks, what are the things that we can actually do something about, and what are we holding as a risk that is a risk because of elsewhere? And that's the hard bit. because those tend to get stuck. So where we've got systems risks, are we drilling down and saying, well, where is the bit that unlocks this in terms of either mitigation to make the risk come down, or are we in a space where actually we're just holding this and doing what we can, but recognising that there is a party beyond this that's actually part of our risk management.
So I think probably, Shane, that's one worth you taking back to cast another lens over it, and I think Judy's challenge is a good one, isn't it? About you know, if it's 2 years old, is it a risk or is it an ongoing challenge for us? Okay. Any other comments on the content? No. Okay. Back to you then, Rob.
And then the ICS strategic risk register, as Shane has introduced it. This is something that's been developed in association with the system executive group. And it contains high-level strategic risks and is a live document. And I think really just to note the conversation recently at SEG around the risk that's around the ICS partnerships and relationships, where there has been considerable amount of work on working together and the importance of that. And actually, the challenge at SEG was maybe it should go up. And the context for maybe it should go up wasn't because people weren't getting along with each other or anything like that. It was more a case of going, actually, there's some really difficult stuff to do that is going to affect the working together of the whole system. So for those of you who may have noticed that the risk has gone up, because that's what it says, that was the context for that, which I just wanted to draw to the board. It is not that the system doesn't want to work together and such that, because clearly that's not the case, as we all know from the board meeting today. Other risks relate to system flow and the risk of harm, and including the where our patients are receiving their care. Tackling health inequalities, which I think has been well talked about today. Workforce and the capacity for the change. So it's not just about how many staff we've got. It's actually of those staff that we then need to support us in the delivery of the change. I think, Maria, you talked earlier on, didn't you, about the releasing people so that they can go and do the, that's what we mean by the capacity for change. But then obviously financial management and investment. So if you like, rolling together the delivery of, our revenue bottom lines, but also having the capital to actually invest where we might need it. So, Shane, I think that's probably where I'm going to stop. If there's anything I've missed, then please draw it out for me. But I think that's the position in regard to the risk register. If I miss one?
No. If I may, to the chair, these are the big risks identified through the SEG conversation. These are the things that SEG constantly gravitate back towards, and that's the reason why they're things that we know as chief executives. If we don't get system flow and risk of harm sorted, the system doesn't work. So that's how we've created that. That's going to become our standard agenda. We're going to constantly look at these things and say, are we managing this risk better? So, but they're a true system because they're across many organisations.
Any other comments or questions? Okay, do you want to? Oh, sorry, Deb.
Just I wonder whether the conversation that we've just had around the contract should go in as part of some of the mitigation plans. And I'm still, it looks quite nice because there's fine, and I don't want to mess about with the fact that it fits neatly on a page, but I'm still not sure that the workforce and the capacity for change, they're kind of shoved together as the same risk. I'm still not sure whether they are the same thing. We can keep them on there like that and make sure that we're adding to them, but it was just a flag. There will at some point be some kind of divergence between those, but it does look neat on a page, and 5 is a nice number.
So point you can look at that, Rob. Just the thing underneath. No, it's your charge.
The compact, sorry, what's the risk?
No, it's an action.
No, it's a mitigation.
Oh, sorry.
Mitigation.
It could potentially be a mitigation for that first risk.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Alison?
I'm just curious. Sometimes I get curious about governance. It's not often, but every now and again I do.
You know you're getting old when you get curious about governance.
Thank you. Thank you.
I apologise,
Aging me as well. Are these aligned to the board assurance framework in terms of strategic intentions, and do your strategic risk registers, are they absolutely marrying up with what we've got written down as strategies? Because it'd be really good to see all three together, because I think that's a perfect unity. Just to balance
present
those.
that back to you, and then if there's a gap, then we've got to look at it in our risk register to understand it. So more than happy to bring that back, Alison. And that's not sad about governance, that's just good governance.
It was a joke. Okay, anything else on the risk registers before I move to risk appetite? Okay, Shane, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So we spent a lot of time through our last workshop looking at some areas of risk appetite. When we looked at this at the beginning of the creation of the ICS, the world was really different, and if we look at the world we're facing into now, along the lines of our conversation that we just had with regards to the joint forward plan and also our operational plan, the question was asked the last time we met, is our risk appetite and our risk appetite framework really correct now? Because do we not have to think about moving to slightly a place where we'd be prepared to take more risk to give us a chance? So we had that conversation as a team, as a board, and really what this paper then looks at is, well, what does that now mean in terms of changing our stated risk appetite statements for this board and how we would apply them. So I don't know whether, Rob, you want to give anything on that paper, or would you just go straight to questions? Because I'm assuming people have read the paper. We all agreed at the workshop what it was. It felt like a shift to the right. In fact, it didn't feel like it was a shift to the right, and everything shifted to the right. But our appetite on quality and safety remained one bit back. Okay, and that was really what the model looks like. So I don't know whether, Rob, you want to add anything more, or whether you want to just go to questions.
I probably want to say two things, if I may. And the first is that if you read the actual all of the words, as opposed to just look at what our current risk appetite is, on I think it's page 4, which is the matrix that we've lifted from the Good Governance Institute. What it does is it brings to life the feel of risk appetite, because it's not just the case of just going, okay, we are currently in the open space. So, for example, for financial, that means we are prepared to accept some financial risk as long as, etc., and moving it just one stage along. If you read it all, you kind of get a flavour for how one interacts with the other and how one is different from the other. That's one thing to say. And I'm not advocating that anyone hasn't read it or should have to read it for the questions that come in, but it really is, it isn't just about labelling something. The second thing is, I couldn't help myself when I was listening to Debs and Helen just a moment ago, talking about the anecdote of the individual who came to the, excuse me, I'm going to get the names wrong, but the transformation space and what have you, and then went back in and said, now I've got to go back into my organisation. So if there is an argument for increasing a risk appetite, item G says staff working in organisations that have a higher appetite for risk can feel more motivated and less constrained, and we all know that we've got to do something differently. So Shane, I just wanted to draw those two pieces out in the context of the conversation today. I'm happy then to take questions.
So happy to take questions, Chair.
Okay, any questions? So I've got Jay, John, and then Deb.
Yeah, want to understand, we talked about appetite for risk, but whether or not it's a localised risk or a system-wide risk, and whether or not that nuance can be pulled out a bit better, because obviously we can take risks very locally that can be mitigated by being part of the system, and it could be that in certain areas we're able to take those sorts of leaps, and how we track that.
We are not articulating individual organisational risk. These are risks in common and our approach in common. You are right. I think if we were to put the risk profile or risk appetite profile of all the organisations of our partners, would they look like this? Probably not. Yeah. What we're saying is when we take system decisions, this is the lens we will apply as a board to those system decisions. But that will not mean that every system applies the same risk appetite.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Jay. John?
Thanks, Chair. I welcome the direction of travel. I think that the move to the right generally is where we ought to be, and given the conversation that we've had through the day around innovation. I suppose my query is just around quality, and whether quality, I suppose whether by default the fact of the other four being Sikh, whether that potentially kind of draws quality into the same sort of space, whether it is possible for quality to be slightly more conservative than the others, and whether the default actually is, like when we look at what it says under SEEK for regulatory, we're willing to take decisions that are likely to that will likely result in regulatory intervention. We can justify these, and where the potential benefits outweigh the risk. So I think I'm just putting the challenge, putting the challenge out there.
And part of the logic of why, even in the old one, our curve, our model looked slightly curved, was because when you put the word safety, so quality and safety, which is actually from a health and care perspective rather than a good governance book, once you put safety in there, are you prepared to move to that higher level of taking the risk when safety is at risk? And that was the original conversations we had. Now, I don't know. I think it's one of those. That's why we ended up having a curve that looked like that, because actually one thing we weren't prepared to take as a board were higher level risks on safety and quality and safety in the same paragraph. Maybe it's something we need to explore, come back to it, John, after 3 months and 6 months, or maybe actually think when we're looking at decisions, are we talking quality here, or are we talking quality and safety? Because it might be the case if it's a safety related issue, we're not moving to the right, but if it's a quality improvement, quality of service, maybe we are moving to the right. But that was the logic as to why the shape looked like that. Because once you put the word safety in, you go, are we really prepared to take a risk on safety? I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but that was just the logic that we got to.
Okay. Deb?
It builds on exactly what Shane's just said. I think it's the question about, and I know this is driven by the Good Governance Guide, but there's a bit about, the regulatory, we're in SEEK mode, so could we actually amend this so that we say, actually, we're going to split out quality and we're going to be clear exactly as you've just articulating. What I'm not sure about is what's stopping us from having that kind of more, that reality check, because it sounds like that's more likely to be what we actively want to be able to articulate. Is if it is about safety, then we are more risk averse and we're in the open space. If it is about improvement, we're almost definitely in the SEEK space. So I just didn't know what was blocking us from doing that, and I apologise because I was away, I think, when you had the last session.
No, fair point. And maybe we should look, quality is different from safety. They are absolutely connected, but I'm sure Rosie, with the board's responsibility for quality and safety, will have a view on that. But.
So, go on, Rosie.
I think it's quite tricky, because actually I think what we know is we're carrying a huge amount of risk already in the system. So the appetite we take needs to be judged in order to mitigate that risk. So there's almost a kind of dynamic piece around that, depending what the decision is. Are we taking a relatively high risk in order to mitigate what is already a high risk? Because you're balancing off the two. So I think there's something about not being too fixed in this and being relatively dynamic depending on what we're planning on doing. And is the risk justified and measured and managed in order to mitigate a much bigger risk? So, for example, on our urgent care flow pathways, you may need to take some quite high risk manoeuvres in order to mitigate the risk we already know that's caused by people staying in hospital for too long, for example. So I think it needs to be a bit fluid, actually, and I think we do need to be relatively brave in our risk appetite and quality in order to mitigate existing risk. And I think we go back to some of the things earlier we were talking about, taking our clinicians with us in order to manage and mitigate that risk and make those judgments. So I think quality always has the three pillars around safety, experience and effectiveness, and safety's in there, but we carry high risk anyway.
Thanks, Rosie. I've got Steve, Alison and then Maria.
I was going to say something similar. I guess my other question is, those in... So part of our risk appetite is informed by the risk appetite of NHSE and Department of Health and Social Care. So if they're shifting, that will have an impact on how we then have to shift. And in the end, we've got to be able to deliver within an affordability envelope the stuff that we want to do, and that again might mean we've got to seek more under certain circumstances. So I guess I'm having a similar.
Yeah.
The safety bit is the red line.
Yeah.
The quality bit and what we can afford and what we can do is informed by many other things, and that's where we might need to go seek.
We might take high risk.
And we may need to take higher. Exactly.
But it needs to be managed and measured.
Yeah.
And also ideally for better outcomes.
And the reason why we actually started the conversation to shift the whole thing to the right, because I do believe NHSE, DHSE and the government's view is actually that we do need to take more risk, because we need to take more risk if we have any chance of being a successful system within the money that we have. And I certainly hear statements from government like, well, we have your back, we have you covered. Those are the kind of things that you say, well, actually then the risk appetite is different. And that's part of the conversation, moving the whole thing to the right.
So are they underwriting it? There's a difference between having your back and underwriting risks. So that's
I think that the planning, well, actually, if I may, through the chair, the planning guidance was a bit more direct on that, which is we expect you to do these things, and you will get cover from NHSE and from the Secretary of State. The planning guidance, I think I might have called it out actually in my chief executive report. Some of the wording that was used, it was much more. We need you to do this, guys, but we also know we're going to stand with you.
all right. So that's interesting. We've got that grid. We know where we're standing. Where can we shift that dial to for each of those items now, based on what we're getting back from?
And that's why we moved the whole thing to the right.
We could move it. Yeah.
We could move. Well, if we move it 2 more, we've gone significant.
Yeah, well,
maybe
I'm just trying to work
that's
out.
a little bit crazy.
It's a question: are we deciding to do it, or are we allowed to do it? And this is what we're.
So in the paper I lifted from the planning guidance, it says we will back local leaders to take tough decisions. Now read what you want into that. But
and having had quite a lot to do with this, that matrix that was produced by the Good Governance Institute is a really handy, ready reckoner on where we are on risk, because it creates a matrix, but it is a concept. It's not a policy.
No.
And so we've got to be really careful when you're talking about significant or open and not putting everything in a box. It is a helpful guide for us, but if we box things off, then we create risk for ourselves as well, because when we get the inspection they say, well, you knew you were in. Okay, well, no, let me explain it. We don't get that opportunity. So it's just it's a very helpful guide, but it isn't a definitive you're in this box or you're in that box. Right, so still got a few hands. So, Joe, I will come back to you, but I've got Alison, Maria, and then back to yourself, Joe. Sorry, and Sarah and Julie.
I've just got a couple of points to make. So I have seen risk statements which start with, this is where you are and this is what you'll tolerate. So you almost have a broad between the two. Sometimes that can be helpful, particularly if you're using it for group decision making, because it means that you're using your risk statement to help you make the decisions, so you don't go below a risk that you've discussed and agreed. You will not go below that tolerated level. That's the first thing to say. And the second thing to say, so I just wanted to check how often this gets reviewed. Is it an annual review, which is standard? Because I think next year is going to be quite different for us, and so therefore if we are using it as a decision making tool, it will have to be quite fluid, because I think some of the things we'll be asked to do will push us in a different direction. So you may want to look at doing the sort of having a stretch just because it will help the decision making, or you just have to accept that you'll talk about it in the given moment that you're making decisions that perhaps feel a bit difficult. That was the only thing I was going to say.
Thanks, Alison. Maria?
I think until regulators are sitting alongside risk tolerances going up and down, it could be a little bit of a fruitless exercise, because if they're not going to work alongside all the people who are saying we're going to offer you a more permissive regime, then our hands are a little bit tied. But I would certainly support the kind of dynamic risk assessment or appetite in line with context and circumstances that change. As for how often it can be reviewed, I mean, it could be reviewed hourly, frankly, couldn't it? Life changes, so I don't know. It also feels like there's quite an element of subjectivity in there, without, what's significant to someone else might be not very significant. And ultimately, people providing cover, I might be so bold, are not necessarily the accountable officer who will be in a coroner's court ultimately. So I think risk sits in different places, and there will be elements to that across a system that may be magnified in some areas more than others.
And this isn't an excuse for us not to want to be ambitious about the way we do things, but if we make decisions on our risk appetite, then we do have to articulate that really clearly to the people that work for us, because otherwise they just will continue to do the things they've done. And I think, Marie, you're right, regulators, but there's professional bodies, there's the media, there's politicians, there's the courts, all of whom are career threatening for anybody who takes a decision that potentially goes wrong. Now, it's the wrong way to apply the lens. As a board here, we should be thinking more ambitiously, but I think, Shane, how we articulate that to our people will be really, really important, because otherwise we will get a clinician in ED who says, that's all very well, but, you know, are you going to be there when the GMC come to speak to me? And are we? Well, I would like to think we will be, but so we will probably need to describe it in some detail. Okay, I've got Julie and Sarah.
It was similar.
Sorry, and then Joe.
First point was similar to yours, Maria, about thinking particularly regulators, and I suppose from the discussion there's something about where do we put this, because there is something about, is this in our plan? Because actually, should we be explicit, and therefore almost by exception, I know it's not the regulators, by accepting the plan, NHSE and others have accepted that is the basis on which the plan has been done, that here is our risk appetite. That was one. And then the second thing that was suddenly hitting me, just because we're working with Good Governance Institute at the moment, and we're doing our own risk appetite. It's quite interesting, I hadn't clicked, so I probably should have, but of course, if as a board in Sirona, just hypothetically, we either said we're going to be totally to the left or totally to the right, it's going to be really hard, isn't it, when we have discussions. So there's something about how we take this into our own organisations and whether we can at least be close, I suppose. I'm just thinking aloud, but it is important that as organisations we're in similar places.
I think because we're talking about decisions we make on a collective basis, it's how we apply the lens around this table and then how you carry it back into your organisation. And if the risk profile is radically different, that's going to be really hard. I'd be surprised if they're radically different, but I think they may have nuance. But the whole idea is these are decisions in common around this table, and then you bring your understanding of risk in your organisation to those conversations, apply this lens, and then have to go back into your organisation and say, well, this is what we've made around this table. That can only work is if we're to use the model a couple of boxes away.
Exactly.
It won't work if you're a 1 and I'm a 5.
Yeah.
But let's explore that. And if you're a 1 and I'm a 5, it can be mighty hard to work in a system. It really is.
And I hope
really
it's hypothetical, but it's just the importance we all
That's good points. Sarah? Sarah?
And just to recognise, when we did the first set of those risk appetite statements, we recognised that different organisational forms might have different, because of the very nature of them. So like a primary care practice might have a very different risk appetite statement to, £2.2 billion group of acute hospitals. It is going to be different. The bit I wanted to just highlight is the head of the National Audit Office, when they gave their sort of annual review to Parliament, talked about this and about the fact that the problems that public services are facing into requires them to take more risk, but also that it's about doing that within a framework. So I think it is really helpful for people, for our staff, as they're thinking about plans, to have these risk appetite statements. But that doesn't mean we just blindly go, just throw away everything, because it's all about being prepared to do something innovative, failing fast, and moving on to the next thing, because we know we've got to shift how we're thinking about things. So it's having that rapid learning alongside it, which is coming back to some of what we were just talking about.
Okay, thanks, Sarah. Joe?
No, I suppose I was just reminded myself about the Bauer-Garber case around gross medical negligence, which had at least some influence around systemic phase of the hospital she was working in, and then the sort of the regulatory versus the court. And you mentioned it, Jeff, in your overarching comment, but I just think as we talk about risk appetite, we do need to involve the practicing clinicians, because actually it's not just the regulatory body, it's the legal system as well, that these people are right, they're right in the crucible of, and it's just what does that mean in practice for the clinicians working on the ground. I was just reminding myself of the case and the impact of the case on that individual.
And there's a reason why we are where we are around all of these different layers of accountability, and they've exponentially grown over the last sort of 20 or 30 years. But there's a reason why, which is when I started public services, there was no performance management. You could virtually do what you liked. There was little or no accountability. We didn't deliver a great service. It wasn't as good a service as I think we deliver now. So there's a reason why we put that scrutiny around it. That said, we do need to lead our organisations into a different space, don't we? So I think what's on here, Shane, I don't think it's radical, but it is asking us to consider what's in the paper about the way we approach risk. And there's four bullet points there, isn't there, which are the recommendations for it. Can I ask around the room, is there anybody who would object to any of those statements? Is there anything in there that we wouldn't sign up to? Albeit the devil's in the detail, isn't it? Yeah. About how we apply.
The framework.
Yeah.
Be really certain about what we're talking about here.
Yeah. Because otherwise we can produce as many risk appetites and statements as we like, but the people on the ground, like Joe has said, will say, well, I'm not prepared to do that because that's my, I could end up either in coroner's court or I could end up being struck off or whatever it might be. And that's a real threat to an individual, isn't it? So I think I'm hearing we're all in that same space where we want to be taking some more considered risks, but making sure we thought it through.
Yeah, and maybe the concept of a use case, when we bring a paper back to the next board, we should articulate exactly the decision we want to make and where we think that decision sits in line with the framework we agreed today. And therefore, if that decision happens to sit out here and our framework's here, then we're doing a live use case as opposed to let's go off and do fictional ones. So we'll make sure we bring that to the board as a live use case.
And it could be that we've got two separate solutions to a particular thing, and we present the open version and the seek version and say this is what we've got, rather than bringing a paper that's already so well formed you're already doing it.
More than happy. I think that would work well.
That'd be lovely.
A live use case.
So it might be really helpful for the NED group to consider how we use this as a way of challenge when we're having stuff presented back at the board. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you, Chair.
Are people happy for Dave?
Yeah, I was just going to say, Chair, that's on the proviso of Shane's really important point that this is, when we're cascading it through our own organisations, this is within the context of those staff that are operating within a system environment, because obviously we have our own risk appetites that I wouldn't want to get complicated as a result of this. So with that requirement,
Thanks, Dave. Okay, I'll move us on then if I can. We can have the updates from the committees and then questions from the public. So I'm conscious Ellen isn't with us today, but I don't know whether Joe, Dave or Rosie have got anything they want to cover?
I was going to kick up. I mean, you have the papers in your pack. I think I'll cover the quality bit and Dave will come in on the performance. The quality meetings in the system have focused on managing and mitigating risk in the system during the winter period. Done lots of work through the system quality group around things like temporary escalation spaces and corridor care to make sure they are as safe as we can make them. And we've done a lot of work at looking at the Sentinel risk of harm dashboard that's been created in the system, and that's been a really useful conversation about how do you manage dynamic risk assessment, how do we do that in a live way. Some great work led by Kieran Flanagan, which we're looking to try and continue with. But please report there's no new significant safety risks reported this board, so happy for that for now. Dave?
And I was just going to note, Chair, we've got the performance report in the pack, and just to note continued really strong performance in relation to elective cancer and diagnostic and mental health standards wanted to draw out. So I just wanted to make sure that people continue to clock that good progress and put us in a really strong place for next year. However, would be remiss of me not to note, and we did go into this at committee, that we are, maybe it feels slightly better today, but in the midst of a continuing very challenging winter with periods of extreme pressure felt across our urgent emergency care services, not different to the rest of the country, but just wanted to kind of note in public that we've been, all services been responding to that. We've had periods of Opal 4, and obviously the pressures felt across all services and acutely in our acute services. who have done a phenomenal job in continuing to support flow and enable our ambulances to remain on the road as best they can. But phenomenal support from community teams and local authority teams in that effort through the winter. And I just want to note that and express thanks to teams in our continued efforts to support our efforts in enhancing flow, linked to the compact we've just discussed earlier. So I think that was the key points of note at committee.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Alison?
Just a log for a future Outcomes Quality and Performance Committee. There's the section on the NHS app. We've talked quite a lot about the app today. Quite concerning about the emerging risk of either cancer diagnosis. If anyone's used the app, you can go into all your test results or scan results before a clinician has told you about them. And clearly something has happened here about a cancer diagnosis. So just a log that we need to play that back into the NHS app discussions that we had previously, because it is very easy to look at any of your results without somebody having talked to you about them. And obviously this is a significant one.
Deb?
I think there is functionality to withhold. It might be, Alison, the point is that bit about working with the practices to make sure that when a result comes in that it can be withheld, and all of that. I don't think it's the app itself. I think it's the implementation.
But it's all linked to.
Yes, but if that's the experience that people are having, we need to make sure we're on it.
Yeah.
And has that been fed back to GP practices?
I've just seen it here in the report on page 218. So I guess it needs to be explored a little more and fed back.
So I guess where's that going to happen? No, I'm not asking you, Alison. So I'm asking exec members really. Where will that happen?
So I think it will happen as part of the NHS app project. It will be one of the objectives to make sure that we address it. And I'm guessing, Rosie, it's covered in the kind of clinical safety side of things anyway. So if we pick it up with Michael, who leads on clinical and digital, we can cover it from that lens.
Or maybe ask Glenda, clinical lead,
for the cancer to be part of that as well. Yeah.
Thanks, Alison.
If it's reassuring if there's mention of papers for escalated to NHS for action as well.
So. Oh, good. Okay. Any other comments on the quality performance, Julie?
Just a small matter, but in the paper it did, at the time it didn't have the Sirona flu and COVID results. And I would just like to say that on flu, Sirona was 60% and 5th nationally, and on COVID, Sirona was 47% and 1st nationally. And we'll take any external recognition. I thought I'd share.
Important to. Yeah. Okay, good. Any other comments for Rosie or Dave or Joe?
Well, actually, just based on the Sirona thing, as a parent that's receiving forms, it'd be good to know whether or not we would tie that into the NHS app, so that when parents have to opt in, it might help in terms of the administration, because I know it can be difficult.
Oh, you mean the consent form?
Yeah. Just a thought.
Yeah.
Let me move on then. Jaya, People Committee.
So we've got the ICB People Committee. A couple of points. We have moved to, as agreed, 2 meetings a year now, April and October. That should coincide with what we've been talking about with the staff survey. If there are extraordinary meetings to be held, then we will call them as necessary. We have also covered that we've agreed the sexual safety policy and toolkit, which is based upon a national policy framework. It's been adapted to fit the ICB's templates. This includes steps to prevent sexual harassment, support mechanisms for staff, and an anonymous reporting system. E-learning is being rolled out and will be promoted regularly. Policy will be launched with clear communication to ensure that staff are aware of what's available. For the ICS People Committee, we've already discussed the anti-racism statement and approach, which has been signed off today. We also received an update on the Work Well project in partnership with Bristol City Council and BCSE partners, which is awesome, especially given, the huge recognition to be given to the standing start of the project and the excellent success rates of the referrals from GPs into the Work Well support. So awesome. This is the start of the system support to the Getting Britain Working white paper. So the expansion of the project will continue into the next year. Operational plan, the operation plan, in terms of assurance, we've continued to have discussions with partner non-execs with regards to their people committees and their foci on the workforce challenges and requirements. So they're all aware of what challenges that are being faced, and people and planning teams are there to ensure that there is triangulation between performance, finance and workforce plans, as Sarah's already covered a lot of that. We also received the workforce monitoring report, and as we've already mentioned, system is over-established, and this will continue to present a challenge as we move on into planning for the next year. Likewise, the temporary staffing spend and medical is an area for improvement, and is a focus for local people committees, as well as continued work within the region. There's been a lot of good work on the reduction of spend in nursing, and that will continue. So that's all for me.
Okay, thanks, Jaya. Any questions for Jaya? No? Okay, thank you. I'll move on to finance, estates and digital then. Steve.
Thanks, Chair. I'll take the papers as read. You've got minutes of previous meetings in there as well. This is the time of the year where we're looking forward and backwards a little bit in terms of end of year. I think the headline that we need to understand is that the 25-26 financial year is going to be really difficult for the system and organisations, and we're focusing very hard on how to change the way in which we manage the savings. We've worked really hard this year. That's delivered us some success, but it's not sustainable. We've used up all of the easy stuff we can do. So we're looking at a big step change in order to really ensure that we deliver the savings that are required in order to deliver our statutory responsibilities. And that's going to be difficult, but I'm assured that we're focusing on the right things. We'll monitor it very closely though.
Okay. Thanks, Steve. Sarah, you to add?
Yeah, I mean, just draw out a couple of highlights from the month 10 report. We have got an improved financial position this month, which is in line with the forecast. We are still forecasting break even, so starting to see us shifting and the actions that were put in place in the autumn starting to come to fruition. But as Steve says, you know, we can see that we probably will have delivered about 80% of our, well, we have year to date, we've delivered 80% of the savings we set out to, and so that's really the area of focus, to really step up in terms of our processes around savings delivery for next year. Okay. So that's all I really wanted to draw out.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm conscious we've had some debate on this in closed board earlier, but important that we're reporting it into the public domain as well. Any other comments or questions? No? Okay, in that case I'll move us on to Primary Care Committee. Alison.
Thanks, Jeff. We've got the December minutes there, which I gave a verbal update last committee. I think I've sprinkled through really the Chair's update through some of the agenda items today. We spent a lot of time on collective action, and it's taking a lot of effort across everybody. So for that to go away is really helpful, because it took a lengthy part of our committee, particularly around assurance. We talked about the primary care operating plan, which Bev mentioned today, the GP access plan. The only thing I would pull out is, for the first time, we saw some quality data from the commissioning hub for pharmacy, optometry and dentistry. And I think it's fair to say we have more work to see to give you assurance on the quality of those services. The data isn't as we would want it to be, and it's difficult to give assurance at this point. I'm not escalating that to the board, because there was a very clear discussion that Michael Richardson had to take back to the hub team. But we want to be in a position to provide assurance on behalf of the board about the quality of those services.
Okay, thanks, Alison. Dave, anything to add?
No, Chair.
Okay. Any comments or questions on primary care? Okay, thank you. So if I cover the Strategic Health Inequalities Prevention and Population Health Committee, it's still very high energy there, Joe, isn't it? I think, and I'll pass to Joe in a second, but 3 substantive items at the last meeting, one around cardiovascular disease, around race, Core 20 Plus in children and young people, and an update on the independent advisory group on race equity. And I think people took a lot away from the meeting about how they're going to be putting some energy into this back in their own organisations. So, Joe, anything you want to add to that?
No, I'm going to promote the sketch note that's at the top of your minutes. So we have a sketch note at every minute. and it's a purposeful thing to try and do things a bit differently, to represent things differently, and again sort of make it more maybe accessible for people. I personally think they're absolutely brilliant, and I really like them, and that tells you actually everything that's in the paper beneath on one page. I think it's been a really interesting group. I think at both times Tracy from the Independent Advisor Group has spotted something around that we are implicitly having some systemic racism within the stuff that we presented in the group. And I think that slightly shocked the group, if I'm honest, Jeff, and actually made us all go, whew. And actually it did make me think about why aren't I spotting that? What are my blind spots here? So I think it's given us some reflection, and there's a bit of a cultural thing about, we talked about the language we use, about making sure we don't use language as a way of power dynamic in the room, as well as talking about the clinical topics that were useful. So there's some really helpful cultural stuff that's much softer, but allows us to have a much more, I think, deeper conversation about some of these issues, which I know we're all passionate about, but I sometimes think we maybe can be at a relatively superficial level, and actually we need to get deeper beneath the surface of it, and it's hopefully creating the conditions where we can do some of that. So happy to keep showing some of those sort of wider aspects of it as we go along.
Okay, thanks Jo. Any questions? No? Okay. John, conscious you haven't met with the audit committee since the last time we met as a board, but anything to update?
Three brief points.
Okay.
Just to make Chair. First is that we have now received the draft annual Head of Internal Audit opinion. We will be discussing that next week at audit committee, but it's pleasing to see that it's an adequate outcome with some enhancements identified as a good place to be and one place off the top rating. Second point is that following a competitive tendering exercise, RSM have been reappointed as our internal auditors for a period of 3 years from April, and with the option to extend for a further 2 years. They've been a good provider and partner to us. They've provided helpful benchmarking and perspective from other ICBs. So I think that's a really good outcome. I look forward to continuing to work with them. And finally, in respect of external audit, we are currently working through a tender process for the external audit service. We've had a really good level of interest from the market, which is a marked change from previous efforts. It's really positive, and we look forward to seeing where that takes us.
Thanks, John. It's good news. Any comments for John around risk and audit? No? Okay. So finally on the updates then, the Integrated Care Partnership, which some of you, most of you should be familiar with, but not everybody. They've got the responsibility for setting the strategy for us as an Integrated Care Board. But I actually think we've occupied a lot more space than that as an Integrated Care Partnership. The discussion we had this time, which I know a number of people around the table were at, the substantive items are around the locality reviews and healthy weight programme. As you know, the chair of the health and wellbeing boards for each of our 3 local authorities rotate the chair. We're actually back to North Somerset next month, so that's so it's the 3rd year it's been running. That's gone in a blink of an eye. I don't know where the time has gone. But Jenna Beaumaris goes into the seat in April, and she's really keen to look at integrated care in a way that she feels she wants to bring a lot of the work of the local authorities closer, which is great. She's very enthusiastic, and I think she will do a great job with it. So we have the updates from there. We had the long discussion around the locality reviews, which I mentioned this morning, and how that links into neighbourhood health, which Shane mentioned in his update. And then the Healthy Weight Programme, which is being badged as the Y Weight Programme, which I think is we had a lot of discussion around that. I mean, it went on for some time, Joe, didn't it? And people were very energised around the discussion, and lots of nuances coming in about, the impact it can have on some people negatively, not necessarily positively, but generally, when a statistic is thrown up to us that 60% of our population is overweight or obese, you recognise that the demands that hit our service as we go forward, and then charting that. I think the slide, Shane, that you showed last week at Maria's session about the ageing population and living with more and more ailments, resonated with that as well, didn't it? So I think that's a really positive one that you'll see that comes into the board here around the Healthy Weight programme and what we're doing across all of our systems on it. So I do think the Integrated Care Partnership is now starting to work in a different way, and we have a different range of people around the table. It's generally most of your organisations at chair level, but it's a lot of other people sat there as well. So I think we are in a different place to many other IOPs across the ICPs across the country, and long may that continue. But Shane, you weren't the last one. I know Joe was. Fiona, you weren't there either. You normally are. Is anybody else there? Have I missed anything? No. Joe, anything to add?
Just with the Healthy Weight pledge has been being developed by the directors of public health now for I think nearly a year, and I think it was approved, wasn't it, Jeff?
Yeah.
So there are actions. So we've all signed up to it, and then there's a series of actions and a little spreadsheet which says these are things you might want to consider, which includes food policies, vending machine policies, both at an organisational level, at a general practice level, at a local authority level. And again, it'd be really good if we all have a look at that and then think, what actions are we going to take forward? It isn't just a pledge and signed up. It has got a suite of actions beneath it, which we need to at least adopt some of them, and I think, and maybe bring it back to the board in a year's time to say, what did we do when we got it?
Yeah, but it will feature in here. But yeah, some really good work being done in it. Okay, that's the updates from the committees. Anything anyone else wants to add? Okay, so let me take AOB before I go to the public questions. Is there any other business anybody else has got that they want to cover? Okay, so we've got two questions from members of the public. Paul Wheeler, I'll deal with first. He's not with us today, but he's tabled some questions which Joe Hicks is looking at, and he will get a written response. But just for the awareness of the board, he's asked the question about whether the board has read the King's Fund report on Lost in the System, and the need for better NHS admin, which evidences the poor experiences of patients resulting from failing in NHS admin. His second point was, what action will the board take to collect information about people's experiences of NHS admin? His third point, will the ICB initiate work with patients and staff across health services in the area to develop a local ambition that describes the change people want to see on NHS admin? And then, will the ICB initiate action which shows that all health service providers in the area recognise the contribution of their admin workforces? I won't go into the detail on that specifically now at the board, just to say Joe Hicks has got that. She will deal with those 4 items, and she will write back to Paul Wheeler personally. Any other comments? Rob, anything I've missed on that?
No.
Okay.
Can I just add one suggestion, in that there have been lessons learned from the telecommunications sector. There was a report many years ago that was commissioned that was called Going Round in Circles. There will be some lessons to be learned in terms of communication, ironically, from the telecommunications sector.
And then the second question is from Barbara Harris, but Barbara's with us. But Barbara, I'll summarise it. I'll pass to Shane, and then we'll bring you in at the end if we haven't covered the areas. So, what we've got from you in an email dated the February 18th, 2025, Claire Hazelgrove MP reported that she had raised the question of Frenchay Community Hospital with the Integrated Care Board. The ICB, according to Miss Hazelgrove, informed that it has a commitment to Frenchay Community Hospital, which still stands, which it does, and I'll pass to Shane in a moment. And then your questions were, what form does the commitment take? Does it take the form of a plan? Does it have a budget? Has a committee been appointed specifically for the use of this site? And then you talk about your Freedom of Information Act. I won't go into the question. I won't go into the detail of that here and now. And then, how far has the business case progressed? We will, again, Barbara, we will write back to you personally in the detail, but Shane.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Barbara. I'll give a bit of a brief overview and ask Sarah, who's responsible for a lot of our capital and improvement. I met with Claire, I met with the MP. It was me who had the conversation with the MP. I think it's very clear we've been working really hard on the Thornbury process, which we then got approval of and presented today. And the next area we're going to move on to is developing what is the future of Friendship, and that's our commitment as an ICB. So now, I don't know what that future will be. I know what the commitment was. I know the need for rehab beds in that part of the world. So I know that what we've got to do. But as an organisation, we have been very focused on Thornbury from South Gloss. We've now got that approval, and I'm giving that commitment to the board today. Friendship is now the place we are going to try to explore what do we do in that space. Okay.
Can you tell me whether we're in the 10-year plan, the 5-year plan, the 3-year plan? You know, I'm 81 now, so I won't be seeing anything in a 10-year plan. But this whole thing has just gone on and on and on. But 41 patients were stuck in hospital waiting for rehab. And I just want to say to the board that I know you see me, but there are many people who've been with us throughout the 20 years who are now infirm themselves and find going to the acute hospital absolutely grueling for all sorts of reasons. And I had to sit and listen to a gentleman at Cosham. I took my neighbour for an x-ray, and he was extolling the virtues of Hengrove Community Hospital, and I'm sitting there with a column of smoke rising from my head because he's telling me what I already know, but don't understand why nothing ever seems to happen. I know that the lead on this is South Gloucestershire Council, and I've said to them, if you can't do it, give it up. Give it back to MBT and UHB. But it just feels like stasis. So can I ask you for some concrete assurance, something firm, a date of when you begin work on this and how you begin it? Because we feel we've just been due for 20 years.
I can give you a commitment that we are going to start to work, but I'll ask Sarah to give you the details of that.
Okay.
So yes, Barbara, so we are, over the last year we've had to do an intense piece of work to make sure we were able to get the Thornbury case over the line, and we're really pleased to be in that position. So the commitment we've made is to now move our attention with South Gloucestershire Council, who have worked incredibly effectively with us on that Thornbury case, to start looking at Friendship and over the next 6 months to have a really clear plan. But what I wanted to also articulate for the board is that in the interim time, we have had those rehab beds being provided out of Skylark and Henderson. So it's not that we haven't got that provision in the South Gloucestershire locality, it's just not at Friendship at the moment. We also, Barbara, I have to be real with you because we've never had capital for Friendship, which is partly why we were thinking about how we work with South Gloucestershire Council to commission. Yeah, absolutely. And that's why we need to keep going with that review and the work that we're doing on Healthier Together 2040, just to make sure that we understand now with where we are and our future health needs, that we're sort of designing what we need for the future. So that's our sort of commitment over the next 6 months.
So Barbara, I'm conscious we're not going to deal with all of those details for you today. I appreciate you asking the question, because I think if you don't ask the question, that this is the purpose of this board, to make sure we provide the right health and social care. It's a reality. We would love to provide everything to everybody, wouldn't we? If we could say that today, then we would say it to all areas of health and social care. But the reality is that we've spent 2 hours this morning talking about massive financial shortfalls that we got in health and social care. But we will do our best on it. So I think that's the commitment we can give you. It is on our plan. If you hadn't come here today, that wouldn't have changed it. But I'm grateful because it brings it into our psyche, and the board will be asking for questions back on that. So we could sit here all day. I'm conscious I can't give you much more now, but we will provide you more information as and when stuff starts to develop. So please be reassured on that, but please keep asking the questions.
Oh, can I also give a bit of positive feedback? I have had the experience of the cardiac scientist, and they do an echocardiogram, and you get the results within 2 days. You're not waiting for weeks for some consultant. Takes the strain off the consultant. He then scans the results, and you also get that within days, because sometimes NHS letters take weeks to get there. So that's a positive. And I also saw a paramedic in the doctor's surgery today, and she was excellent. So some things are going well.
Thank you, Barbara.
And we'll listen to you all doing your risk thing. I think you ought to get crash helmets.
Well, we will pass. And I'm sure most people around this table do. But we will pass that back to SWAST, and I know Maria will be delighted with that feedback for cardiology as well. So. I'll draw us to a close if I can. Thank you very much, everyone, for your patience today. It's been a long day. I think the conversation has been very fruitful. I really appreciate you giving up your time. I will see you all very shortly.